Well, greetings and salutations, everybody. I am Scott, your host for today. Looks like we've got a pretty good crowd already lined up, and it's exciting. As if you didn't already know, we hit our minimum, and we are surpassing that now by we're about 180K. Now, the one thing I want to challenge is if we keep going at the pace we are, we might hit 200, but I'm saying we can hit 250. I think we can actually pull that off. So let's see if we can get some more backers. And I think we still have two $10,000 backer slots still available. So get on those if you can. I'm going to introduce Vanessa down. She's on different angles of me depending on the day. I consider her a human Swiss Army knife. She's kind of does a little bit of everything, and she's going to be interfacing with the crowd today. Most of you know Tom. He's our fearless leader. And, well, not completely fearless. Otherwise, I guess you would be vibrating off this plane. But still doing a good job with that. And also quite excited. Before every live stream, I investigate our guests, and I went on to Shaz Khan's website called goalcast.com. First video I pull up is about humility, which was the first spiritual discipline I was taken on as a kid, and now I'm the best at humility. And then the second video I saw was about loving people for who they are. So, Shaz, you're batting 1,000 for this guy. You've already got a friend and a fan in me. Why don't you tell everyone else a little bit about who you are, and then I'll have you ask the first question to Tom.
Awesome. Well, again, thank you for having me, and thank you for that wonderful introduction, kind words. So my name is Shaz Khan. I was born in Minnesota, grew up with an affinity for math and science. Graduated with a degree in electrical engineering, and ever since I've tried to explore my interests in an array of industries to figure out what I can learn, what I like. So I dived into a number of fields ranging from technology to nightclubs, music business. I currently have a restaurant to digital publishing. You could say I'm a curious person. I began journaling in 2009, and ever since I've fallen in love with the written form of expression. So I find that understanding and connection to others through the tool of language allows me to feel the most myself. And so I set on a journey of self-discovery, taking an entire year away from media and social media to dig deeper into my motivations, to understand how my perceptions, opinions, and worldviews are influenced by factors perhaps unbeknownst to me. After plugging back in from a year offline, I joined with a few friends who had started an organization that goes by the name of Goalcast. We curate, create, and publish inspiring and motivational media content. We have now over 10 million subscribers, and some of our videos have crossed just around 200 million views. So that's super exciting, not just because of the numbers, but for the mere fact that so many people resonate with the message that we're deploying. And that's the world I want to live in. So that's the type of stuff I want to continue doing, to be a helper in the world. And to do that, I need to understand more so I can share more. In pursuit of this world, I'm writing a book called Cancel the Noise, dealing with self-awareness and how it impacts our thoughts, behaviors, relationships, and the quality of our lives. I seek to explore all the factors that affect that quality: consciousness, psychology, philosophy, art, physics, you name it. The more clarity I have, the more discerning I'll be in showing up to the world and for others with intention. So with that, I'm excited to be here. To learn more and to be part of this conversation. So thank you for having me.
Well, yeah, we very much appreciate having you on here. It's always great to get these, various different perspectives. We've had, scientists, and now I would kind of put you in sort of the Renaissance man type of category. So definitely looking forward to hearing your perspective. Speaking of which, why don't you ask Tom the first question right out of the gate?
Sure thing. So, Tom, this is something that I've been wondering. I've been digging into a bit of your work, and by a bit, I mean quite a bit. And so we're talking about simulation theory here, right? The prospect that we are not operating in base reality. However, what we are experiencing, this universe is, did we lose Tom?
We did.
Boy,
Temporary.
apparently that wasn't the right question, Shaz.
New question.
This one doesn't like it.
He went Rachel again. Yes.
I'll give it a few seconds, but
while we're filling space, Shaz, I'd love to ask you just a quick question about your website. I mean, how long has that been around, and how did that all get rolling? Oh, well, let's get back to that. Looks like we've got time.
I'm sorry, mine just dropped out on me, but here I am back again. Sorry, Shaz, I didn't mean to drop out in the middle of your question.
The system must have heard something. No, so to the tune of simulation theory, we're operating currently in this universe, and this universe is governed by a set of rules, right? And among those rules are the laws of thermodynamics. The second of which states that the tendency of a system to increase in entropy is present. Right. So how do you, in your work and your theories, reconcile that with the matter of consciousness, or the larger consciousness system, call it, attempting or driving us to lower entropy? That sounds like it's at odds with each other.
Yeah, it's not really. Within our system, there's lots of things that lower their entropy. A child growing up, a crystal growing, it lowers its entropy. So you can lower your entropy, but it requires energy. It requires input. It requires work. If you don't do anything, and basically the second law says, if you just let everything sit, it'll all decay. It's all going to come apart, if you wait long enough. But if you put energy into a subsystem of that system, then that can go the other way. That can lower entropy. So you get a solution, and it has a point that it can start its growth in. You get a crystal, and that crystal then produces a lot more order than what you had in just the random order in a solution. So there's an entropy reduction there. But the second law says that if you look at the whole universe as a system, take that all as one big system, the entropy is increasing, with time. But consciousness can evolve by lowering its entropy. Civilizations often will lower entropy. Laws and structure lowers entropy. So there's lots of things we can do to lower it, but we have to keep putting work in. So we build a house, and basically that lowers the entropy as far as our living goes. We no longer just have to deal with whatever storm and rain and wind and cold just happens to blow in. We actually can build a structure that lowers entropy, gives us order. We don't have just random weather anymore. We can create our own weather inside the building, but we have to keep doing maintenance on that building and on the equipment and on the HVAC unit has to constantly have maintenance done on it. Otherwise, it will all dissipate and go away. So consciousness is the same way. And it leads to an interesting point where people sometimes think that, well, you grow up, you lower your entropy, you become love, and then you're done, right? You've done it all, you're done, you're enlightened, and you go off and do whatever enlightened beings do. And that doesn't work that way, because as soon as you stop putting effort in to your growth, to your lowering your entropy starts to increase and you start to backslide. And pretty soon a little ego pops up around that, that done being, and that starts to grow. So you always have to work. You always have to stay engaged. You always have to be a part of the solution. You can't just drop out and say you're done. After all, love is about helping other, and dropping out sounds like it's all about self. If you are evolved, then what you want to do with your time is help, be a part of the solution. Get back in that game and see if there isn't some positive influence you can be. The idea of, I'm done here, I want to drop out. That's not the way it works. That's not about love or about other, and it's not about constantly putting in effort to lower your entropy. So that's how that works. So the entropy within consciousness is similar to entropy here. If you don't put in any energy, the second law says it's just going to deteriorate over time. So it requires constant vigilance, constant effort. You have to constantly care. And that's what growing up really means. Not that you get to exit sometime. You get out of this hellhole and go someplace nice where all the done people sit around and, sip mint juleps and, tell each other how wonderful they are. That is not, that's not the way it ends up. The end game is you get to keep on working. You never are done.
It's interesting now. You guys, Shaz brings up thermodynamics. Tom, you're talking about wind and rain, and I'm a meteorologist, so this has been like a big bunch of work for me. So some great concepts out there. In fact, that was a question that I was mulling over in my head. So I'm glad we were able to get the answer there. It looks like we just got another backer. Let's keep them rolling. We love to see those things pop up on our screens. And speaking of our crowd, Vanessa, what's our first question?
Okay. Yeah, for some reason, there's something going on with the chat, and anytime I type anything, it's not going through. So I'm not ignoring you guys. I see what you're typing. I just can't reply to it. But the first question here is from Nick. So Nick is asking, Tom, is there a way in which I could at least remember that love is the answer when I come into this incarnation? And remember that I have to get rid of fear and that it's my responsibility to help evolve the larger consciousness system, because I think I could do so much more for evolution and helping others if I could just remember that next time around.
Okay, Nick, where your confusion is here is about the intellectual level. You're saying if I came in with an intellectual knowledge of these things, then I would be able to do a lot better. But it's not the intellectual knowledge that really enables you to do better. It's about the being level, understanding. That's where the love is. It's not in your intellect. It's who you are, not what you do so much. So the way it works is that you come here with the quality that you have earned, with the low entropy quality you've learned up to that point, you come in with that. So it's a cumulative process where you keep getting better as long as you evolve and don't de-evolve. And then you come in with that, but no intellect. And that no intellect is on purpose. That no intellect gets rid of all of the baggage that you're carrying with you as well. And now you get to take this level of quality you've earned and express it in this new lifetime. And how you express that is straight out of your being level, because you don't start with an intellect. If you started with an intellect, you'd start gaming the system. You'd start and say, okay, I know what my job is here. I'm supposed to do this and this and this. And oh, look, there's a little old lady who wants to cross the street. I'll go help her because that's the right thing to do. And that's, that's the kind thing. And I'm here to be kind. Well, it's not about doing. It's about being. It's not about acting kind. It's about being kind. And you don't need an intellect to be kind. So the intellect will often just get in your way and turn you to acting, to playing a role rather than being it. So you want to be kind, you want to be love, you want to be compassionate, not act those things. So the intellect really gets in the way. You're much better off to come here and just express whatever it is you are, whatever quality you've got, express it in that new environment that you find yourself in. And yes, sometimes you'll get a tough environment. Sometimes you get a easy environment that makes it easy to grow up. You get a lot of opportunities. So if some of them are tough and some of them are easy, it all washes. So don't feel too bad that you get something tough and you're struggling. And if you just came in knowing it, you'd do so much better. Well, it would seem that way, but it's not really an intellectual process. You really will do better coming in without an intellect and just being whoever you are, turning this new experience packet into a reflection of who you are. So that enables your growth.
So Tom, I've always kind of said that we come into this world with preloaded software. Is that basically kind of what is that it's our being level is the preloaded software?
Yes, exactly. We come in with a quality of consciousness that we've earned through our evolution here. And then we do with it whatever we do with it. Hopefully we evolve ourselves and make it even a lower entropy consciousness when we're done. But we don't have to. We can make a bunch of bad choices and end up going the other way. But then we can always bring that back up the next time or the time after that. So you have to think of it not as a one life thing, but as a whole collection of opportunities to grow.
Okay. Well, Mike is asking, Tom, can you elaborate on the being level? What exactly is the being level?
Well, the being level is who you are, and I call it being because it's what you are. I could say it's what you be, but that's poor English. That's the nexus of it, though. It's what you be. It's if you get rid of the intellect. Well, let me give you an example. If somebody says something that makes you angry, okay, somebody insults you and you get angry, you don't think about getting angry. You don't say, oh, that was an insult, I should get angry now. That would be the appropriate response, and then you get angry. No, the anger just wells up out of your being level. It's not part of an intellectual process. It's just who you are. And the reason you get angry is because you have fear in there, and that fear creates ego and belief, and that's why you're angry. So that's what I mean by a being level. You don't think your way through it. You just are it. So it's you at the core. It's you as a what's the word? You as a now the word's getting away from me, but
Authentic?
Authentic. That's the word,
Hey.
Vanessa. Thank you. You as an authentic person. It's not who you think you are. It's not who you'd like to be. It's not who you're trying to be. It's who you are. So that's the being level. Now, in our culture, we tend to be in our head most of the time, in the intellectual level, because that's how we get paid. That's how we make money. That's how we drive our car. That's how we interact with people. We are we're always processing and judging and assessing, doing analysis, and that's seen as a very good thing to do in our culture. People who don't do that get called names like airhead and that sort of thing. So we do that naturally, but if you're working with the larger conscious system in a non-physical, or if you're trying to heal with your mind or remote view or interact with somebody telepathically, if you want to do those things, they all have to be done from the being level. If you try to do them from the intellect, not much traction. You have to do those at the being level. So learning to get into your being level and exist in that state is a big challenge for most of us, particularly in the Western world where the intellect is king. So that's the being level. It's a part of you, and it is not necessarily easy for you to access or stay in, because that's not the habit that we have in this reality. An interesting side note, though, is that if you get rid of your fear, your ego and your belief go away, and you now are all just one thing. So you're not a bunch of different levels. You don't have an intellect and a what do we call it? The subconscious and a conscious. You don't have the superego, the ego, and the id. You're just one thing. Your awareness, and you're aware of all the parts of you, and you work out of the being level then. And your intellect, your cognitive function, also works out of the being level. So being level and thinking are not what do we say? They're not crosswise with each other. They're not impossible with each other. They do go together. You can think at the being level, and eventually you get rid of the fear. You do think at the being level, but when you have fear, your intellect tends to respond to that fear with ego and belief. So that's why it sounds like I give the intellectual level a bad rap, but that's not the case. The intellectual level is a wonderful thing. We need that. It's important. It's just that when our ego is what's informing that intellectual level, then it tends to get us into trouble.
Shaz, I'm kind of curious your thoughts so far, just hearing what Tom has to say.
Yeah, so when I was discussing with my friends and followers about this dialogue occurring, there was a lot of curiosity as to the nature of the conversation, Tom's research, and a lot of questions immediately came up on the concepts at hand. Right? I mean, we're certainly talking about the details, but just for those viewers' sake, the concepts at hand here there's this idea that they may be not hand in hand with traditional science, call it, right? And so in order to avoid the effect of, well, no, but, listen to me, I have valid evidence. Instead of that, what I suggested to those individuals was that, you know what you know. If I drew a circle and I told you to fill in that circle, color it in with the amount of information you knew, you'd probably draw a little dot somewhere in there, right? The circle representing all body of knowledge that could be. And I think what we're talking about here is the things that we don't know yet, right? Things that are possible. They exist in the realm of possibility, and science, with the tools that we've been using to explain the universe around us, have to get to that point. And what we're doing is trying to ascertain, what tools do we have access to that explain these phenomena. So I just wanted to, put that out there for people who are kind of walking into this and saying, what are they talking about?
Right. Well, it plays into a lot of what, even just the video that you did about humility, that, we have such a small understanding as to what's going on, that it's all, you can look back on every major change in science or spirituality, and there were always people that said, that's not the way it is. It's absolutely not that way. But, when you humble yourself to say, it could be any number of things, I think that's when we really start to see the, expansion of our consciousness, especially as a collective. So,
one way to express that humility is in terms of being, not jumping to conclusions, being. Better tell me the word again, Vanessa.
Authentic.
You're doing really well. Being
optimistic, open-minded.
Authentic.
This is like we got a new game going on here, don't we? Skeptical. Skeptical. Being skeptical. You have to be skeptical all the time of everything. And just as Shaz said, people know only a dot in a big circle of what there is to know. But because you don't know what you don't know, we all think that we know almost everything that there is that's important. We say, yeah, okay, maybe there's a few things I don't know that are important, but I've been around the block and I know almost all the stuff that's important by now. And that's really not true. That's something that we trick ourselves into believing just because we have to logically be ignorant of what we're ignorant of. And I deal with that by being skeptical of everything. And as I often say, the person you should be most skeptical of is yourself. That's number one. But you need to be skeptical of everything. But being skeptical doesn't mean that you think it's wrong. Being skeptical just means you're open. You're open-minded. You say, I don't know. So rather than feeling obligated to either believe something or not believe it, either I go for it and I believe it or I throw it out, that's a very bad way to look at things. That's a poor choice. You should just take things in and say, well, maybe, what's my own personal data about that question? And then just leave it open for maybe one day you'll get more personal data that will shine a little light on it. But meanwhile, just keep things open as possibilities. So it's very much what Chaz just said. You have to look at life as a lot of possibilities, and most of which you have no idea even exist, and kind of go through it that way, one step at a time, and that maximizes your chance at learning something. If you go through it thinking you know everything, you're not going to learn much. You'll come out the other end just not a whole lot different than what you started. So it's an attitude about being open, about humility, about realizing that you're ignorant of what you're ignorant of. And there's a lot out there that we don't know.
Absolutely. All right, Vanessa, what do we got next?
Okay, so the next question is from Jose. Jose is asking, Tom, have you looked in the database to see what the results of these experiments will be?
Ooh, interesting question.
Yeah, no, I have not. I generally don't do that. If you start doing that, you'll just end up confusing yourself. You see, maybe I'll start out with a little different direction. I've noticed that the people who have the greatest ability to access information paranormally, intuitively, let's say, the greatest ability, say, to heal or get information telepathically or out of databases that are non-physical, these are the people that use it the least. And it's mainly used by people who are just learning, who are just trying to figure out, that they can do it, or does it exist, or is it possible? And that's where most of the effort is. But it's a problem. You can get in your own way if you try to live in a bubble where you try to be aware of all the future probabilities and how you can manipulate those with your intent to come out the way you want. You get information from all the people you meet. You know their spiritual quality, you know their health, you know their emotional state, and you get all this and you use that to manipulate your relationship with them and so on. You start not living in the real world anymore. You live in a bubble, you see. You're creating your own synthetic world to live in, and by doing so, you cut yourself off from the very challenges that you have here, that you need to grow up. So basically, no, I don't access that kind of information. And if I did, it would just confuse me because I'm always skeptical about everything. Always skeptical about everything. So if I get that information, I'm not going to say, oh, well, I was talking to God last night and he told me that I should do this for those experiments. Well, that is me giving up my free will. You see, I have to decide what experiments I do, and I have to decide why. If I just do something because I get that information and it tells me that that's what I should do, now I'm just a follower. I'm not really making my own choices. I'm making somebody else's choices. And I've known this larger conscious system a long time, and I know what it'll do when you stop making your own choices and start depending on it or somebody else. It'll hit you right between the eyes with a 2x4 and tell you to wake up. It will send you some misinformation that'll have you walking off a cliff. And that's what you get if you refuse to make your own choices. So I've learned to always be skeptical, and I'm skeptical of myself. I'm skeptical of everything I get out of the databases and through paranormal means. A lot of times it turns out to be true, just the way it is. But I have to deal with that and make my own choices. I don't make choices because of what I get from that database. So no, I don't bother to look at things like that. That just gets in the way. They'll work out however they work out. I'll learn whatever I'll learn. And what I learn depends on how open I am and how well I do. So it's a challenge for me. And to somehow skirt that challenge by trying to look behind the curtain and see what the probabilities are is just not useful. It just gets in your way. But now if you're just learning, it's a good way to learn because it helps you develop consistency. It helps you develop your ability to exist at the being level. It helps you to control the noise in your consciousness by doing all those things. So those things are a good thing to do if you're learning. But once you're not learning anymore, as far as just trying to convince yourself that all of it exists, then it's a good thing to just use occasionally when you need it to help somebody else. Otherwise, you let it go.
Yeah, definitely, noticed over the years, like usually the universe will, give me a little pencil to the forehead saying, hey, do this. And then it becomes maybe a ruler to the forehead. And then it becomes a 2x4 to the forehead. So it gets less and less subtle, I think, as we go. All right, Vanessa, what else we got here?
Peter is saying that, Tom, you mentioned 30% of the leading physicists, many from top universities, have stated that virtual reality is a good idea. So why haven't there been any virtual reality experiments coming from these leading physicists and institutions?
Oh, there have been. There's been probably dozens of experiments that were to test the simulation theory, that whether or not this is a virtual reality. It's not that they're not doing anything, but mostly those experiments don't come up with very strong evidence. What they come up with is, yes, it's a possibility. And it looks like a good possibility, but it hasn't so far been very dramatic. And maybe ours won't be either, but I'm hoping to get something very dramatic to happen so that it makes a splash and attracts a lot of attention. So it's a hard thing to do. It's really hard to take a physical experiment to say something about what's non-physical. See, physical experiments are very good at saying things about physical reality, but they're not all that good at saying things about something that's not physical. Well, consciousness is not physical. So to do a physical experiment that then turns around and says something dramatic about consciousness, about the non-physical, is a very hard thing to do. So they've been trying it, and that 30%, by the way, is just something I made up. I don't know. That was my guess from all the papers I read and the things that I get, and the discussions I see on YouTube, physicists getting together. And I noticed not only are these physicists that take virtual reality serious pretty plentiful now, but they tend to come from the very best institutions. It's the guys at MIT and the guys over at CERN and other places that are the ones that are more in the front of it than the guys that are from smaller universities. So I think it is gaining, and it's gaining respectability. Otherwise, I wouldn't have been able to have a paper peer-reviewed and published on the subject. It would have been thrown out if they said, oh, virtual reality, that's nonsense. But they don't say that anymore. They look at it and say, yeah, that's something we need to explore. So it's a serious subject in science now. It was a marginal thing that everybody thought was a bad idea, was stupid, but not anymore. Not anymore. Science says, yeah, that's got some credibility. We need to, study that. We need to do a little more with it. But again, that's the 20, 30%. There's still a big contingent there that says, that's stupid. Virtual reality, this couldn't possibly be a virtual reality. That's still the majority. But the virtual reality guys are gaining all the time. In a decade, they've gone from almost 0% up to the 20s and 30s, which is just my guess about how it is now. So that's a lot for a decade.
Shaz, I'm kind of curious, prior to, connecting with us, was this a concept that was in your mind, or is this fairly new to you?
No, absolutely. As Vanessa and I had previously discussed, I've been contemplating, what is the nature of reality for a very long time. Perhaps not from a scientific data-oriented perspective, but definitely taking on a lot of the, hypothesis and, challenging those hypotheses perspective, namely the idea of consciousness. I think it's scientifically and sociologically irresponsible to shun the idea that, this may be a simulation, or that reality need be questioned. Because if you look at ourselves and the idea that we're having a subjective experience and we're experiencing consciousness and have an inner monologue, we don't even understand how that works, right? Materialists have one view, neurologists have another view. I mean, everyone's got their idea on whether it's biology or something transcendent of biology that contributes to our awareness. We're getting to a point now where we can begin to use stem cells to clone entire organs and duplicate, if you will, living beings. However, nothing is breathing in consciousness. And matter of fact, even if it is, we can't measure it. And so the idea that all of these questions exist in ourselves is grounds enough to explore it. So it's absolutely something that I've continued to question.
Yeah, and it's, one thing I would remind is, everybody in the audience, I'm a big Einstein follower, and he made the comment, in his career that science without religion is lame and religion without science is blind. Obviously we would use the word spirituality as opposed to religion these days, but, one of the greatest scientists of all time certainly saw a combination between what we consider to be the spiritual world and the material world. So we've got a lot of open room, I think, in science that Tom is helping us start to look at. So, all right, Vanessa, let's go back to the audience for another question. Looks like it's pretty active.
Yeah, absolutely. And just on that point, Scott, Einstein was also quoted for saying reality is merely an illusion, albeit a very
sorry, right. I interrupted you.
Yeah, I think you guys would have got along really well, Tommy. You and Al. Okay, so there's a question here on relationship, my favorite topic. So Stephen is saying, could the introduction of monogamy into the human experience be a consequence of evolution trying to lower entropy by enhancing love between humans? And if so, how successful has this been?
Well, I suspect that monogamy was introduced and accepted by humans because of their instincts, but not so much the instincts of helping us become love as helping us survive. I think it's mostly survival. You know, in this biological reality of ours, we have two criteria for evolution, and that is survival and procreation. If you can't get those two right, then you become extinct and you disappear from our biology. So over the 200,000 years that humans have been walking around as kind of modern humans, they've gone through a lot of different changes, and our instincts that we have now developed over those 200,000 years. And I suspect that pair bond was valuable in making sure that a man's children and a woman's children that they had together would survive to have children of their own. That's the name of the game. The children have to survive to have children, otherwise you go away. So part of that required both parents to be taking care of those children. You know, there was a lot of work. It was a very difficult place. It was a very dangerous place. And if you didn't have both people committed to taking care of those children, then the children had a much lower probability of surviving and having more children. So I think that's where the pair bond came from. It was just an efficient process. Okay. But that doesn't mean that that's exclusive. There was other things going on as well, and other things, other times, other parts of our environment came up with other conclusions. So we humans are not kind of unilateral on that subject. You know, we have a wider sense of possibilities there. For instance, it was a very dangerous place for everybody, and they say that the average age, you know, the average life expectancy was about 35 years. So if you got 35 years, you were really one of the old people, and not many people got to be that old. That was old in those times. Well, you know, that a lot of that risk was being taken by males. They were the ones that had to forage for food, find a shelter, and protect the women and children so that those women could keep having more children and those children could grow up to have children. Well, when you have that situation, you're going to end up with more women than men, because men are doing most of the things that are the most dangerous, and you know, they're not living as long. So you can also see that polygamy was also something that was that comes out of our instincts, in that when a woman who needs to be taken care of, fed, sheltered, and her children watched after, then who's going to do that when her man dies? Well, either the tribe does it or somebody else does it. And there's all sorts of rules, like the wife then, the husband's brother takes care of his wife, or it's the husband of one of her sisters takes care of her. And we've had these kinds of rules in our culture for a long time, where family takes care of family. And if somebody's left stranded, other members of the family pick that up and take care of them. So all of that's part of our instincts as well. But yes, the idea of forming a pair bond between a man and a woman, and them both taking care of the children, that was on our road to survival. And that's why that came about. It wasn't because it was a lovey thing to do. I think it was a good tactic for keeping the humans from going extinct.
Okay. Okay, so that it was just designed to further our biology and procreation. What do you think about what are those? A lot of people these days, especially in the spiritual community, they're all about having multiple partners and being in an open relationship. And you've talked about having an open relationship as well, and that being a good thing to do.
Well, the thing about open relationships is that love is open. Love is about giving. You see, love is about other. So love is not about making deals or you do this for me and I'll do that for you. That's not love. That's need. And most of us indeed fall in need more than we fall in love. That's just our nature. So love is an open-ended thing. And love is not something you trade. Love is something you give away. And you are not limited to the people you love. If you love somebody, it's about them, not about you. So you can love many people and love them in many ways, right? Your children, your parents, your significant other. There's lots of people that you love, you give to. And if you have a significant other and that significant other feels like they need to go someplace else or be with someone else, if you really love them and they think that's what they need, you'll wish them well because you love them and care about them and want them to have what they need, you see? So this idea of possessiveness, you're mine, you belong to me, is a need thing. The idea that you are an individual, you can make your own choices. I love you, and therefore I want you to do everything that you feel you need to do to be happy, to be profitable, to get by. So if you just look at the nature of love compared to the nature of need, you'll see it is not an exclusive process. It's a process of giving and caring about other, not about protecting self and making sure self gets what self wants, you see? So in that case, I'm not saying that, we should all join, free love communes. That's not my point. My point is that these things are not necessarily wrong. You just need to be, open-minded about things. I'm sure every situation can be both right and wrong. I'm sure there are situations, of where the two people are very exclusive, and that works out very well and is a very good thing. And there are probably also cases where people are not so exclusive, and that works out well and is a very good thing. And there are cases in both of those groups where it works out terribly and it's a bad thing. So we can't just make up rules that this is always good and that's always bad. That's, again, not being skeptical. That's coming to a belief. And we don't want to run our life based on beliefs. We want to just be open-minded and skeptical and kind of let people do what people want to do. Let them run their own lives in the way they want to. And, if we can learn something from it, good, but wish them well, feel caring toward them, feel, that you want the best for them, wish them well, and let them be. So, we always get into this thing of right and wrong, and, our cultural norms are right and other people's cultural norms are wrong. And that's just being narrow-minded. And that's not about love. That's about belief and ego.
I think we see that, with the statistics in divorce, that, so many people that, now, especially, looking back when I was half my age, that, when you're in your early 20s, you're still figuring out who you are and all that. And then you end up, getting with somebody more out of need than out of love. And I think that's why we see, so many different divorce rates. And so, I got to about 30 and realized I didn't really need anybody anymore. So it was really easy to be single from there on out. So I'm probably doomed to a bachelorhood life. But anyway, Vanessa, what's our next question?
Okay, let's see here. Okay, so Jonas is asking, is the universe appearing to expand at an increasing rate because time was different in the early universe?
No, I suspect that the universe is continuing to increase at an accelerated rate because that's just the way the rule set works. We have this rule set. Okay, virtual reality has a rule set that defines it. It defines all the, we might say, energy exchanges. All the interactions that can possibly take place are defined by this rule set. All virtual realities have rule sets. World of Warcraft has a rule set. Elves can't fly, part of the rule set. Elf stays underwater too long, elf drowns, part of the rule set. So we have a rule set, and that rule set is how this reality works. Now, the rule set wasn't just laid out, this virtual reality isn't programmed. This virtual reality is evolved. So you start with initial conditions and a rule set, and you let it evolve. So what evolves has to be in consonance with that rule set. Let's see, where was I going with that, Vanessa? Where was I going with that?
Okay, so why the universe is expanding rapidly now?
Oh yeah, the universe expanding. Okay. That's just because that's the way the rule, that it's part of the rule set. And why can it expand? People say, well, how could it expand? Expand into what? If the universe is all there is in reality, then what is it to expand into? How can it grow bigger? And the answer to that is, in a virtual reality, bigger is just a larger number, right? I can take my laptop and I can put in the equation of a sphere, and I can let its radius of that sphere go up. Let's say I can square it or go up by a factor of, or an exponent of 10 every cycle through this equation, and pretty soon I'll have a sphere in that computer that's much bigger than the universe. And that's just a very small computer. So you see, big is not an issue when you're talking about a virtual reality. It's just larger numbers. And the idea that this universe has to expand, and not only expand, but expand at an accelerated rate, is an artifact of the rule set. Now, what science is trying to do is understand that rule set. That's what science is all about. What is the rule set and how does it work? Okay, well, they don't know yet about that, but that would be a part of the rule set that would be a little harder to, things that are on a cosmic scale are a little harder to study than things that are not. So that's all. It's not really a big mystery how that works. It's not expanding into anything. It's just numbers that get bigger. Space is created by an origin and 3 orthogonal vectors. That's 3D space. And that's all you need to make space. So it's easy to make space. It's easy to make new space. You just make those vectors a little longer and you've got some more space.
Right.
I was going to chime in quick and say that, the nature of expansion is based on a change of events, which is a change in time, and that would be another dimension being added in, right?
Yes, absolutely. When you think about the expansion of events early on, think about this virtual reality evolving. So the initial conditions, right? Ball of plasma, high temperature, high pressure, and a rule set. And when you punch the run button, you let that plasma do whatever it does according to the rule set. Well, we know it expands and turns into planets and suns and all that sort of thing. But the point of this simulation wasn't just to make a universe. The point was to create an entropy reduction trainer for individuated units of consciousness. That was the point. And we got a long way to go before we get evolution to produce those avatars that will be interesting to be played by individuated units of consciousness. And particularly in the beginning, there really wasn't a lot going on in the sense that you couldn't describe statistically. I suspect that if I was the larger conscious system and I was making this big simulation, I would have sped the time up. I would have started using a bigger delta T through my cycles, and time would have started to go really, really fast, and I would have done most of my calculations via probability, because at that point it was just all this stuff expanding, bumping into each other, coalescing, rules like gravity coming into play, and all of that could be done. Turn the gain up on time there. Let that speed up until you get to a more interesting part of the simulation. That part wasn't very interesting, so let's get that out of the way. Let all that happen fast. Now, the larger conscious system has a much smaller quantum of time than we do. Okay, so we, when I say we, this physical universe, this virtual reality has its own delta T. It's a quantum of time. And in a dynamic simulation, every delta T you recalculate, where things are and what they're doing. That's just, the way simulations work. Well, its delta T is much, 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 and I mean billions of billions of billions of times smaller than ours. Therefore, it has lots of cycles between our cycles. From one delta T to another, it has lots of cycles. So it can make this thing spin really, really fast with if it wants to. It can speed this process up and then slow it down as it gets to be.
It's to be more
Frozen.
Oh, you're frozen like this. Okay.
Well, Shaz, I was actually going to ask you a question. When you and I were communicating prior to this, I was saying it seemed like you and I kind of shared a similar voice, and my voice sort of came through largely starting out studying spirituality, but then finding science. Where did yours? Were you raised in a spiritual family? How did you come to where you are?
I would say I'm just simply a discerning individual, right? Sure, my default is science and mathematics, and I'm good at that stuff, so I default to that. But the reality is that, okay, things are happening around us, and you want to know why, and you seek out explanations for those things. Well, the thing that I like to do, that I encourage everyone to do, and call it a scientific process, call it pursuit of spirituality. I think they don't necessarily diverge, but rather converge to the degree that if you want to know why and you discover a reason and there's data to support that reason, right? Either your personal experience or calculated data. Well, just because you found a solution doesn't mean there aren't others. That doesn't mean there aren't other possibilities. And that doesn't mean that you aren't seeing things from a different perspective. For example, if I draw a 6, if you're standing across from me and I draw a 6 on the table and I say that's a 6, and you say, no, it's a 9. Right? Who's wrong? Who's right? Right? It's a matter of perspective. And I think I like to induce perspective into everything that I gaze upon or think about, because what is could be much more, and what isn't could be. I mean, it's interesting. We've been talking about love and anthropology and physics and philosophy, and it's all very fascinating, but it's so vast. How does one make sense of all of this stuff and tie it all back to what's really going on here? Ultimately, like I said, we can't deny that we're having a subjective experience. We are experiencing life as we are. The mere idea, just from an inspirational perspective, that there is a version of you in the mind of everyone you encounter that is not you, and you are not, you don't know, right, is grounds enough to induce wonder. There he is.
Hey, back from NPMR.
Yeah, who knows?
Well, you've just missed out on a great response, Tom.
I bet. I really feel bad I missed that. Yes, I think Shaz probably has a lot of good insight on these things, and I was just kind of doing some conjecture there, but I'd like to hear that.
Well, it gives me a good
I was off
to...
someplace. Suddenly, actually, my video just stayed. All the rest of you disappeared on my screen. So after about 20 seconds of that, I decided it was probably me and not you, and I had to reboot the browser to get going again.
Well, it gives me a good reason to remind everybody that we will be posting this to YouTube in just a little bit, so you can watch it again or post it for your friends, share it all over the place. We're still trying to get more backers to come in. Our minimum was 150. We reached that, but we could really use double that in order to do what we want to do. So I'm putting out the challenge. Let's hit 250 in the next 8 days if we can pull it off. I would offer to shave my head or something, but I look really bad with a shaved head. So we'll just, you'll have my undying appreciation if you guys can help pull that off. So we're starting to run a little low on time. Why don't we go, Vanessa, to one more question?
Yeah, one last question let's do Raj. He's talking about the hard problem of consciousness. So Tom, what would you say to scientists who claim consciousness is just a result of brain function from their deterministic materialistic viewpoint?
Maybe I just say good luck. People have been trying to solve that hard problem. That's why they call it the hard problem, because they've been working on that now for about 100 years and haven't made any progress whatsoever. And of course, the reason that it's a hard problem is it doesn't work that way. Consciousness is not created by the brain. That is why they're having such a hard problem to show that it is, because it isn't. So I just say, well, good luck with that. It hasn't happened yet, but and I'd be very surprised if it does happen. But who knows? I'm open-minded. We'll see. I just put that at a very low probability that consciousness is a computation of the created by the brain. There's too many problems with that idea. But if you're a materialist, you really don't have any place else to go. You're kind of stuck in that in that frame.
Question for you then, if I may. So if consciousness is not created inside the brain, right? Then these companies that are emerging now, as they should, to investigate, the nature of the mind, companies not like neuro,
Right.
In a frame of thought that the brain or the mind is non-computable. In other words, it transcends our ability to create algorithms that can duplicate its functionality. Well, what do you say of efforts by individuals such as Elon Musk and others who are looking to compute what is happening in order to better understand? Would you not agree that the attempt to understand something, even though you may not think that it works that way, is worth it, because people may use your research and learn something in one direction or the other?
Sure, I agree. Oh, it's worth it. Yeah, go for it. Work it out. We need all that research. That's an important step, and I would not suggest that anybody doing research on the mind or neuroscience or that sort of thing, no matter where they're going or what their beliefs are about it, I would encourage it and support it and say, absolutely. You couldn't have any other viewpoint if you're skeptical, and mostly skeptical about yourself. That has to be your viewpoint. You want them to keep going on. They may discover something that that you're not aware of or that you don't think about. So I'm pro research and experimentation in all manners of fields, in all directions. I don't have this, oh, that's not my idea, so that's a waste of time. I don't come from that viewpoint at all. As long as people are trying to learn something more, there is no waste of time. If they exhaust possibilities, if they go through lots and lots of possibilities and exhaust those, even if all they do is turn up something negative, well, it can't be this and it can't be that and it can't be this other thing, that's good. That's very valuable. Experimentation gets benefit out of the things that work the way you think and out of the things that fail. You learn from everything. So yeah, absolutely. I applaud those people. Keep on chugging. That's why my kind of flippant attitude there. Well, good luck with that. It's not that I think that they shouldn't do it. I think they should do it. We need them to do it. Every possibility needs to be investigated.
Mm-hmm.
That's good science, when you investigate everything. If all you do is investigate the things that you believe, will work that way, then you've limited yourself to a very small set of the possibilities. And that's not being skeptical at all. That's being a believer. So yeah, I'm very pro all of that. I think it's important that they do that. I'm glad they're doing it. That means people are taking consciousness seriously, not just blowing it off, and that can't be anything but good.
In addition to that, David had one quick question here. He's saying that if nothing is stored in the brain, then every time I remember something, am I just tapping into the database, the Akashic records, he calls it?
You're not tapping into anything. You are consciousness. Okay, in the MBT theory, consciousness is fundamental. And this virtual reality is derived from consciousness. So consciousness is fundamental. You are an individuated unit of consciousness playing an avatar. Okay, so you don't remember anything. Just like the elf, you're a consciousness. You're playing the consciousness of the elf when you're playing World of Warcraft. So the elf, doesn't have to tap into you, to make a choice. You are the consciousness. You're making all the choices. So your memory is your memory. That's all in consciousness. In a virtual reality, your brain is a virtual brain. It's computed in a computer. The computer in a virtual reality only computes what you see. It doesn't compute things that are inside. A brain is never computed unless you cut somebody's head open, and now you need to compute a brain so that people can see what's in there. And then they dig down into that brain. You have to compute things like neurons and individual gray cells. And when they dig down into that, you'll have to compute what's in that. But then you put it all back in the head and sew it up again. The system no longer has to compute a brain. You see, you don't compute anything except what the players can use. The players can use the fact that you act like you have a brain, and that's because you have a consciousness. So the actual trying in a virtual reality to compute the brain and all the molecules in it is not a good way to run a virtual reality. It's too expensive. If you try to in a virtual reality render every molecule and every atom and every quark, it's too much. That's very inefficient. Virtual realities have to be top-down probabilistic models that look at the world mathematically in a much more simple way. Okay, so that's the nature of reality, and why I say that. So no, the brain doesn't remember anything. It doesn't process anything. It doesn't think anything. That's all the job of consciousness. You are consciousness. This avatar is just a pretty picture in your data stream so that you can see what's going on and the interaction between you, other players in the set. That's what it is. You're the consciousness. Get the data. The picture is just ones and zeros on a hard drive.
So the Scarecrow in the Wizard of Oz really had it right the whole time. He said he didn't have a brain. he was right there. Well, cool. This has been just a fantastic hour. I knew it was going to be after seeing some of the stuff that Shaz has been putting out on his website. It's Goalcast. Is that correct, Shaz.com, correct? Okay. So go be sure and check that out. Just going to remind everybody, we are still going. We have just a little over a week left. We're going to try to hit as high of a number as we can so we can do as many of the experiments as we can. And so hopefully we can continue to give you updates as we're doing them. Tom's even been talking about if it's possible, we may try to get a webcam in there so that you can actually watch this stuff happening live, which is a little frightening at times to think about, but it's certainly something I'd want to do. So please be sure and continue to back us and share with your friends. We have a live stream tomorrow, and we have a live stream Thursday. Tomorrow with a PhD physicist that graduated from the University of Washington with a PhD. And then on Wednesday, we have the executive director of the Monroe Institute. So it's a power-packed week that we've got going on here. We're just going to try to cram in as many interesting guests as we can. Shaz, certainly no exception. We appreciate having you on here today.
Appreciate it. Likewise. Thanks for having me, guys.
Well,
yeah, thanks, Shaz. Appreciate
and
it.
Thanks.
Glad you signed on.
Mm-hmm.
And thanks to to Vanessa first for interfacing with the audience, and thanks to the audience for joining us. We'll catch you tomorrow.
All right. Sounds good. Thanks.
See you guys.
Bye.